I'm sorry for the delay. We are sold out. Okay, good evening. Good evening, everyone. We are full house and we are very happy for this. I want to welcome you all to this roundtable discussion. And also I want to welcome all those who attend through YouTube. I'm excited we inaugurate this academic year with such an interesting topic and with an amazing lineup. I want to thank all my colleagues for accepting the invitation to participate in this roundtable. Let me extend my gratitude to the university's research committee for supporting the Small State in World Politics Forum, of which this roundtable is part. I want also to thank my co-organizer, Anders Wevel, as this is also part of the EISA standing section on small states in world politics and is also supported by the European International Studies Association. We were previously discussing with my esteemed colleagues what is a great power. And I guess an alternative definition would be that great power is a state whose domestic politics has a global footprint. Whoever will be elected in few weeks in the US presidential elections will have an impact on our daily lives, actually, and on every region across the world. Today we'll discuss this impact with my esteemed colleagues. Anna Bozinovic-Fenko from University of Ljubljana, Rory Miller from Georgetown University in Qatar, Rick Fohn from St. Andrews University, Anders Wevel from University of Copenhagen, Leslie Riner from University of Bath, and my two colleagues from University of Macedonia, Fotini Bellou and Kostas Zaras. And without any delay, I'll give the floor to Anna for her intervention.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hello, everyone. Very nice surprise. Excellent organization so far. I'm glad that you're interested, and like Rebecca said, we all should be and have to be, unfortunately, or interested in the matter called US elections, whether we have voting power or not, because we are in this or other way affected as citizens of the world. We were asked to address three elements, and they are regional security governance in our region, global governance in general, and then diplomatic relations expected from any of the two candidates which will be elected as US president. So in terms of, I'm addressing the Balkans region, so not just Western Balkans, but Balkans as a traditional geographical political space. In Southeast Europe. In terms of regional security governance, Balkans is obviously, or at least Western Balkans, a post-conflict region, so there are several open issues, specifically Serbia-Kosovo dialogue, Dayton Accords are contested within Bosnia, regionally as well. EU accession or generally integration process towards this region is not going as planned. Tempo is stalled, etc. So there are bilateral issues on that between currently Bulgaria, Macedonia, previously also Greece. So there are several open issues. Trump's administration has addressed these issues in let's start with the word interesting way. Trump personally has mentioned that that Balkans has special significance to him because his wife is Slovenian. So that tells us something, but unfortunately he basically portrayed very limited knowledge from the region, and also very low responsibility in terms of future affairs in the region, because as you most probably have seen, by the end of his term, he proposed a territorial exchange between Serbia and Kosovo. So this kind of land swap, which is obviously very well governed by international law and unimaginable in terms of such a multi-ethnic region, because it would have a domino effect in the entire region, cause instability. This was very irresponsible, but it was very much supported by ethno-nationalist governments in the region, of states and of sub-national units. In that sense, we could expect such a policy to continue if Trump 0 or 2.0 appears. Harris would absolutely pursue what we presume more responsible, liberal world order-based policy, which would be against, ethno-nationalist policies. And we also presume that they would not interfere in what is deemed as a European matter, but would support Europe in dealing with its own members or neighborhood, if we call it that way. In terms of global governance, I would say that the Balkans is a highly penetrated region. So basically, there are a lot of big powers, global powers present. So there's EU, but China, Russia, US. If we look at P5, at least we have to say UK as well. And there's regional powers present in the region, Gulf states, Turkey. So a second Trump administration would definitely make use of this plethora of actors, but as we have seen, if we look at three main areas where Trump has changed US, at least style of policy, they were liberal world order, or the focus on democracy, then the focus on European security, and how they see liberal or trade. And in these terms, I think that in the Balkans, effect would be Trump's potential, or for sure, weakening of Euro-Atlantic relations, obviously because he has a more illiberal democratic agenda, and that would steer, again, populist or extreme positions on migration, on EU accession, conditionality, and so on. In terms of European security, NATO would be very much disturbed. Trump even mentioned freezing NATO. Bulgaria, for example, is a state that is extremely exposing this as a danger in the region. And war in Ukraine is something where Trump thinks that we should end, in terms of, any kind of American support to Europe should end very quickly. Whereas Harris would have, more continuous approach, as we have seen it now under Biden. And to conclude, in terms of diplomacy, we are safe to presume that Trump could continue with bilateralism and move away from multilateral and responsible global policies that U.S. as a big power has been doing traditionally. So just to give you, and connect this to trade, as I mentioned before, to give you an example, Trump's personal style in diplomacy, also, businessman kind of style, has been very well echoed in certain governments in the region that are well connected to business people. For example, recently, Trump's oldest son, Donald Jr., visited Belgrade. And he assured, or actually they signed, US and they signed a 99-year lease on the complex of Yugoslav People's Army headquarters, which was severely damaged in the 99 NATO bombings. So this really, and this was done during the previous administration. And if Serbian diplomats call American diplomats as friends of Serbia, you get an idea that a lot has changed under Trump's administration. That is a really, really big change. And they expect to profit from this kind of business diplomacy if Trump is elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And from the Balkans to transatlantic relations, and my colleague Fotini Bellu.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm very happy to be in this distinguished panel and to discuss an issue that more or less we discuss every day in these corridors in the university. And we are a little puzzled. And I will follow Anna's structure. I will say a few words about what's going on in the European continent and the transatlantic relationship and the bond. And then I will continue with a discussion about the two candidates' character and practice. And a small kind of projection. In 10 minutes, I think Rebecca has told me, or 7, something like that. I'll try to be very quick. We all know that at this stage we are facing a big war in the European continent. A nuclear power against a non-nuclear power using a multi-level approach as a war condition, apart from, of course, nuclear weapons as we speak, although the threat is there. And we have a key issue as regards NATO and EU cooperation, regarding the enlargement in the first place of the EU, as long as we have invited a number of countries, including Ukraine, to join the EU, which is a challenge by itself. We are facing a difficulty in facing and in looking at real challenges, as long as speaking of rather the European leadership. The EU and its member states and big powers within the EU are very confused as regards what to project in the context of the European security. At the same time, NATO has adapted to the new situation, and it's evolving a strong cooperation between the EU as regards threats of internal and external nature. And at the same time, if we freeze this situation, the difficult situation as regards European defense issues, European defense itself, which at this stage we are very much dependent on NATO. We have two candidates. First, candidate Trump, who is isolationist, unilateralist, very skeptical to entangling alliances, which means that he views alliances and organizations are useless for the Trump administration, as it was viewed as useless in the past. He has, of course, expressed himself very critical against NATO, which he devalues NATO unless it serves its interest. This is the classical perspective of a realist that views international organizations as serving its own interest. Of course, on the other hand, if it is Harris, we do know that she is inexperienced. She has not very much experience in foreign policy. It reminds me of the arguments of President Clinton when a few decades ago in the early post-Cold War era, it took him 18 months to learn how foreign policy is conducted. I'm sure that Kamala Harris is not that, it will not take that much for her. She's a good learner, and she's very pro-human rights. She's she promotes international law, and she views cooperational schemes and multilateralism as a multiplying force for encountering and addressing common threats. And then there is another question, which of course we have to discuss, which is a general issue, which are the common threats, are still common threats. Are the two blocs, the US and the EU countries and the EU itself, face the same challenges? This is something that I guess we will discuss. But looking at the transatlantic relationship and bond, I'm sure that, of course, we have other issues apart from the European security context. We have trade and protectionism. As regards protectionism, both candidates, I think, will follow more or less a strong stance as regards trade and economics. I'm sure that although Kamala Harris will be much more diplomatic, she will not refrain from a strong stance as regards EU trade. However, as regards what Anna said about the rules-based international order, I'm not quite sure that something that is of great interest to the EU and the European countries. I'm sure that it's going to be this is going to be a contested issue. I'm not quite sure. Another issue that is very, very important, very, very critical, important for the transatlantic relationship is Russia. And the approach that, this is something that Anna already addressed, that the approach that the Trump group, let's say, which we don't know much about yet, which is crucial, envisions and approaches authoritarianism. On the other hand, Kamala Harris has a great sensitivity against authoritarianism and towards human rights, equality, and so on and so forth. I think I will put my very final comment as regards the sensitization, as regards the authoritarianism that is growing in the European continent and in its immediate neighborhood. And therefore, as long as Trump says that I will negotiate, even on the phone, the peace in Ukraine, this means that he doesn't seem to recognize the notorious effects of accepting and sponsoring authoritarianism in the European continent. I think this is for now, for me.
Thank you so much, Foteini. for bringing the transatlantic relations in, and we will travel to the Gulf states now and to Rory Miller. Rory, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for the invitation to the Small State Forum and this really excellent idea for this presentation. You know, when I refer to the Arab Gulf, I'm talking about the 6 countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council: Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain. I'm not talking about the 3 other countries of that region, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran. That would be a whole different story. Although having those neighbors next door is one of the reasons why this election is so important to these Gulf states. That's the first point. The second basic point I want to make is, yes, on one level, we're talking responsible Democrat, irresponsible Donald Trump, authoritarian, non-authoritarian. But in this part of the world, even going back to Obama, there was a lot of public expressions of this question. Does one president mean anything different than another president? And this has been perhaps challenged a little with the first Trump presidency, but it's still very much in the public and in the elite thinking. So what I want to do for a few minutes is consider the factors that these states consider when they think about the upcoming election. The 2 most important are, how is a Republican or Democratic president going to impact on our independence? And by independence, I mean our freedom to make foreign and domestic policy decisions, especially in 4 areas: the energy sector, the purchase of sensitive civilian tech, AI, the purchase of military hardware, and diplomatic relations with US opponents, China, Russia, and Iran. These are the key questions that they're thinking in terms of. And of course, all of these are interrelated: buying military hardware, sensitive equipment from China, having diplomatic relations with Iran. But again, I'm not necessarily sure, except possibly, and then only possibly vis-a-vis Russia, whether a Trump or a Harris administration is going to make a lot of difference on these key issues. Second, they're thinking about their physical security. The US is still the main security provider in this region. These countries have not been able to overcome decades of over-reliance on the American security guarantee. And so the really second important question is, will a Harris or Trump come if we call them in a crisis? And yet again, they're not really sure as of now whether one will make a huge difference over the other in that regard. 2 years ago, I was approached by a Ministry of Defense in one of these countries asking about a possible project on Trump 24. A Ministry of Defense, not a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which says a lot. The third consideration is whether Harris or Trump election victory will mean for the shrinking power differential, the shrinking gap between China and the United States. A big issue in this region. And again, specifically, will this denial strategy, denying China opportunities to expand its economic and diplomatic and political influence, and which is bipartisan in Washington now, will this be impacted on and how by a Trump or Harris administration? And again, I doubt there's going to be any significant difference in that regard. Now, I think here it helps to just understand the Gulf as a stage. And the participant in this case is the United States. And the audience are the Gulf states. And they're watching the way that the US actions are demonstrating its political will, its reliability, its commitment, not just its capabilities, but its willingness to act and how it's willing to act. And in the last decade, the scorecard has not been good. The Arab Spring, Syria, the Iran nuclear treaty, and now the Gaza war, you know. And if you ask someone in this region whether the Biden administration is responsible, reliable, no, definitely not. We have to work with them, we have to deal with them, but they ain't either of those things. Now, admittedly, there have been times in the last decade and a half where some of these actors were happy with an American administration that brought this instability, disorder, and insecurity. But as of now, right now in 2024, none of these six countries want a US administration that brings instability, insecurity, and disorder. And my final point is this. Traditionally, because of this uncertainty, traditionally, the Gulf has placed a lot of importance on individuals, leaders, partly because of their own political system, and partly because of the personal relations built up with US leaders. But increasingly, this is changing towards trying to invest in institutions, US institutions, whether it is the Pentagon or embassies. As someone said to me, American embassies in the Gulf are doing one thing now. They're election proofing bilateral relations with these Gulf countries in case something happens. And in these terms, the last point I want to make is which candidate is likely to be better or worse for the existing and deep institutional commitment that America now has to the region. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rory. And from the Gulf states to the Scandinavia up to the north.
Thank you so much. I will address 3 questions in my brief talk. First, I will talk about why is the US and the US election important to the Scandinavian countries or the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Iceland. Then why is there preference for Vice President Kamala Harris in the Nordic countries? And then finally, how will the Nordic countries react to the result of the US election? And addressing the first question, why is the US election and any US election important to the Nordic countries? There are 3 reasons for this. And the first reason is security. All 5 Nordic countries are dependent upon the United States, both the United States in NATO and United States bilaterally for their national security and for regional security, both regional security understood as regional security in the Nordic region, which I would say also encompasses both the Baltic Sea area and the Arctic, and for the security in the wider European region. And if we zoom in on national security, you might argue, and some have argued, that each of the Nordic countries are basing their national security on what we call an Atlantic business model. That is, that they've bound up not only their national security policies, but also their deeper defense choices, acquisitions, on cooperating with the United States. And this will only be more in the future as Finland and Sweden have now joined NATO. The second reason is economics. The Nordic countries promote free trade. They are all, you might say, social democratic welfare states, but are also pragmatic, liberal, egalitarian social democratic welfare states. And internationally, the model of this kind of welfare state is also based on trade. They're small states with small markets. They need a regulated international space where they can trade freely, but under some constraints and also with respect for instance, the climate, for human rights, and so on. And for many, many years, the US has been an ally and a promoter of an international, liberal international order, which were approaching what the Nordic countries saw as their interests in this. So they're dependent upon the United States in their international political economy. They're also worried about the course of the United States that we've seen actually since the Obama administration, which has more economic nationalism in the US policy. And third, because of values. A strong component of Nordic foreign policies is a value component. They promote the values of their own societal model. An important part of that is equality in the world, but there are other parts which actually are very much aligned with US priorities, and in particular traditional US priorities such as promotion of liberal democracy and human rights. Then I move on to the second question: why do they prefer Harris? And you might say they prefer Harris exactly for these 3 reasons, because they find that on security, on economics, and on values, a Kamala Harris presidency will be closer to the Nordic position than a Donald Trump presidency. This is not, as was said also earlier, a perfect situation. There has been a long now continuity of economic nationalism, strong economic nationalism in U.S. Foreign policy. This is likely to continue. I cannot see Kamala Harris breaking with Joseph Biden's foreign policy for the middle class. So she will also try to bring home the economic surplus for the United States there. We've also seen a toning down in parts of the value policy, at least in parts of the committed engagement here. And there's this ongoing discussion on security commitments. But on the balance, there's an expectation that Kamala Harris will be better for the Nordic region than Donald Trump. And then there's a fourth reason, which I think is just as important, and that's the Nordic countries are small states that are dependent upon a rule-based international order. Like other small states, they favor predictability, and if there's one thing that Donald Trump is probably not, then it's predictable. So the unpredictability of a Trump presidency definitely causes some worries in the Nordic countries. So what does this mean? How will the Nordic countries react to the result of the US presidential election? First of all, and no matter the result, we will see all Nordic countries greet the new US president. They will stress how valuable the transatlantic connection is for each of the Nordic states and for Europe and the world in general. They will welcome the president and they will invite the president to their countries. Then second, there will be differences in terms of how they react to Harris and Trump. If Harris is elected, I think there will be cautious optimism. We do not know so much about what Harris stands for in foreign policy. She's inexperienced. She's not a visionary. That might be a good thing from a Nordic perspective, to have a pragmatic US president. She'll probably be cautious in the first part of her presidency. The Nordic countries will be hoping for business as usual, but also look for new opportunities for what they can do with the US. If a Trump is elected, I think we will see three types of action from the Nordic countries. The first one is moving closer to the United States. This is actually what we saw during the first Trump presidency. That might seem paradoxically, but they reacted to this very strong rhetoric of Trump by reaffirming how close relationships were. So they're trying to kind of hold on to the US no matter what Trump says. Second, we will see an element of diversifying or hedging. They will seek to strengthen partnerships with other countries, particularly other countries in the European Union, France, Germany, and now outside the European Union, the United Kingdom also. And then finally, we will see the Nordic countries taking advantage of a Trump presidency, in the sense that they will find the niches, they will be filling out the blanks, they will be compensating for the policy areas not prioritized by a Trump presidency. So they will use this also to enhance their own status and their own influence. We saw that during the first Trump presidency, when, for instance, Denmark placed a lot of weight on gender equality, on reproductive rights, on birth control in the global south, and thereby kind of filled out what the US had left because of Trump's presidency's policies. So I think that concludes what I had to say.
Thank you so much, Anders. So you are seeing more of small states as order fixers, if we have Trump.
And order clingers, I think.
So, from Scandinavia to Middle East, and my colleague, Konstantinos Zaras.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor to be part of this roundtable. Over the next few minutes, I will share some thoughts on the impact that the US elections might have in certain parts of the Middle East. Let's start with the broader context. Despite the much discussed US disengagement from the Middle East, Washington remains the most powerful external actor in this area. But the strategic landscape of the region has substantially changed during the last decade. And what I want to point out is that US policymakers have limited options with regard to their Middle Eastern policies during the last decade. Regional actors have become more assertive, and they are taking the lead in driving developments. So As a result, the US finds itself in a reactive position very often, responding to changes rather than steering them. Looking ahead to January 2025, how might US foreign policy change under a new administration? We can only make assumptions and acknowledge the risks that premature assessment may have. But anyway, in the scenario that Kamala Harris assumes the presidency, we might see more continuity than change. And Harris, as a senator and as a vice president, emphasized the idea of engagement through diplomacy, displayed a commitment to the rules-based order. But through time and as we approach the elections, we have seen another face. She appeared more firm and more tough on certain issues regarding the US policies in the Middle East. And for example, during a recent interview, she labeled Iran as the primary, the most important adversary of the US globally, even surpassing Russia. So this suggests that her Middle East policies might largely follow the current Biden trajectory, but with maybe some differences in tone. On the other side, the second Trump presidency would likely revive his signature approach, personal diplomacy, disregard for the liberal democratic values. And as he stated in Riyadh in 2017, we seek partners, not perfection. So, but yet Trump's unpredictability leaves room for surprises, and such as the possibility of a renegotiated deal with Iran that will not have the name of JCPOA, but it will bear the Trump's name. Okay, this is something that we can see in the future. Now, let's move to certain states and conflict zones in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa region, beyond the current hotspots of Gaza and Lebanon. When it comes to Syria, the Harris administration is likely to follow Biden's policies. This includes focusing on counterterrorism, maybe putting some obstacles to the Assad regime, and maintaining the status quo in the Syrian Kurdish regions in the north and northeastern parts of the country. But on the other side, the second Trump administration could probably take a more hands-off approach. And there is a possibility for even withdrawing all the US troops from Syria. This is something that aligns with the Project 2025 report. It was a recommendation of this report. So from this perspective, the Assad regime might welcome a re-election of Trump, while the Syrian Kurds will be really hurt by this development. If we consider recent developments, the reapproaching of Assad with certain Arab countries, with Turkey and so on. In the cases of Libya and Sudan, where we have a devastating civil war that rages now, we have a more central role in dealing with the crisis from regional actors rather than global powers. And the US, it seems that it takes a backseat. So, and the same holds true for Yemen, even though the involvement of the Houthis in the Israel-Iran confrontation have brought the US closer to this issue. But the new reality on the ground might be that the regional middle powers are increasingly shaping outcomes and with minimal US intervention in certain theaters outside the Iran-Israel front. A few words for Egypt, where Harris, of course, would likely maintain Biden's pragmatic approach towards Cairo, acknowledging the country's key role in regional stability. Trump, on the other hand, might be favored by the al-Sisi administration since he displayed his support and he adopted a more lenient stance on domestic political issues. And also I would like to mention the case of Jordan, which is for Jordan the US elections are particularly important. The kingdom's stability and survival depends on its close relationship to Washington, and it has reached this relationship a high point during the Biden administration. So if Trump is elected, Jordan might face additional challenges, especially if there are dramatic alterations in the West Bank. So last but not least, a few words about the core security issue, Iran-Israel competition, the war in Gaza and Lebanon. No matter who wins the election, the US support for Israel will remain strong, okay? Kamala Harris has advocated a two-state solution in the past as the end game of US policy in this front. But the new wave of escalation and the destruction and human suffering that it brought in the area have limited the prospects of a peaceful resolution in the Palestinian issue. On the other side, a second Trump presidency we might see increased concessions to Israel, including maybe settlement expansion or annexation of certain parts of the West Bank. And in this scenario, the repercussions will be severe for the whole region. And all the players in the region will have to reassess their strategic orientation. But regardless of the scenario about the new president, it's difficult to envision a situation where the protection of Israel will not be a central pillar of US policy in the region. In conclusion, I would like to say that while the US remains the most important actor, external actor in the Middle East, regional dynamics have become more important. And although we can speculate about potential directions of the US foreign policy after January 2025, the complexity of the Middle East issues makes it clear that nothing is ever straightforward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kostas. And we are discussing US elections and US foreign policy here, but we need to keep in mind that the average US voter doesn't care about foreign policy, apart from the current war in Gaza for Arab voters and voters of Jewish origin, which in some states might be critical.
I would add the evangelicals or the youth vote.
Yeah, true, and the youth vote. And I will now give the floor to Rick Fone, who will focus on
Canada.
Excuse
Canada?
Me? Canada.
Yeah.
We will focus on states with a special relationship to the US, Canada, and maybe UK, a little bit.
Okay, thank you. It's a real treat to be here. We only have a very few minutes. I'm going to speak more specifically to Canada. I'm a Canadian. I live in the UK. I can speak to the UK if you want. Very few minutes. 5 points I'd like to make. The first point is, and it has 5 points, why should Canada matter? I want to make a case to you. What is this election about? This election about is the White House. Why is the White House the White House? Because of the British-Canadian attack on the United States and burning the White House and having to repeatedly paint it white to hide the burn marks. But more importantly, the second point would be this is a very peaceable relationship after that incident in 1814. Right? 200 years of peaceable relationship. Third, this is the world's largest bilateral trade relationship. So it's not only a peaceable relationship, the world's longest undefended border and so on. Play along with me. Does 3.6 billion American dollars sound a lot for a trade relationship? Play along, say yes. 3.6 billion. That's per day in the US-Canada relationship, not per year. Okay? Within that, we used to have something called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. This was a world leader, the EU aside, in making a major economic bloc. Hold that thought. Fourth reason, Canada, it has industry, but it's also resource rich. Geographically, it's larger than the United States. The United States covets many things, our softwood lumber, water, oil, and so forth. Fifth reason to think about Canada, I think of it as a test case. Seeing that we have had such a fantastically workable relationship for 200 years, the official words are special friends. If this relationship goes wrong, then there isn't a lot of hope for other places. So I think it is a test case for us. Second main point, we're talking about the United States. We also have to talk about the other side of these relationships. There's going to be change in Canada. We have Justin Trudeau. He's adored for his big hair, his tattoo, for having been a bungee jumping instructor and School teacher, all lovely stuff. There's no way that he can remain in power. The time is up. And there is no way that his opponent, Pierre Poilievre, will not win. Poilievre will win. This is significant because Poilievre, if you just want to glance at Canadian media, you will see immediately that he is referred to as Canada's Trump. Now, I actually think, and it is significant, I think he's more a J.D. Vance. I mean, not only does Poilievre manage not to make these oddball references to Hannibal Lecter and things like that, there's a lot more of a presentability here and a future political right, or even far-ish right, than I think Trump has been doing. This is significant for the relationship. Now, third, what is it that we're changing from? The Biden presidency was very fine for Canada. On an interpersonal level, Biden, having been chair of the Foreign Relations Committee of the U.S. Senate, had a lot of engagements with Canada. It was very, very smooth, very, very workable. Now, something else that's potentially going to change is that under the Trump administration, good old NAFTA, this very important, successful, integrated free trade agreement, was revised into the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. And that actually had, we have to remember that sometimes under the Trump administration, there was bipartisan support. There was bipartisan support in Congress for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada new trade agreement. There were only a handful of U.S. senators who voted against it. Bernie Sanders was one. Chuck Schumer was another. You want to guess? You got it. Kamala Harris. Ostensibly because she thought that the environmental protection was much too weak in there. Now, what Trump insisted on in this major agreement was that there would be a review clause. The whole thing has to be reconsidered in 2026. That's not far. And that means potential reopening of everything. So this is a very, very serious consideration for us. The last 2 points. The fourth is, and this is probably what you really want to know, the Harris-Walz presidency, vice presidency for this relationship. Well, Canadians tend to think that anybody who's experienced Canada has got to love Canada and has got to favor it. Where did Kamala Harris spend a lot of her high school years? Answer? Yeah, Montreal, right? You can go and see her Canadian yearbook and that. She doesn't seem to have any pronounced affinity for Canada. And I think we'd be a bit delusional to think that there's any currency in that. If we want to play with it, fine. Walz has said some nice things. Minnesota, of course, borders Canada. I don't think it's consequential. What I suspect from a Harris presidency is that things will be reconsidered. And I think it'll be a tougher ride, but it'll be negotiable, and that's important. The fifth, what about a Trump second presidency? Well, we know, and this hits all of us, he wants global tariffs. I'm not convinced, are you convinced he understands what tariffs are about? I mean, I think he thinks that the other side is paying those tariffs, whereas actually it's Americans paying the tariffs, but so be it. I mean, that's a big problem because the United States does import an awful lot from Canada. So we will certainly get, I think, at least those 10% global tariffs he wants to put on everything. We probably will get more. And that will make for something of a fractious relationship. And it's certainly pretty clear. I mean, it's important, and this is what diplomats do. You anticipate when there are governmental changes. You talk to both sides. You make overtures. You get a groundwork in case it's them or them. That's certainly going on. But I have to say, coming to my last point on why Canada matters, the test case idea, I think if this relationship doesn't work, and I think it's going to be something of a rough ride, amazingly, with the Harris presidency, but it might be a very, very awkward one with the Trump presidency. The Harris presidency has that variable of Poilievre because he's a right-winger. And I think he will make a lot of antagonistic moves towards a Harris presidency. So the bilateral relationship could be quite awkward, even with a Harris presidency. The Trump presidency, I mean, my goodness, I think we are planning for disaster. And that we need to do. And the test case is all the more important. If this relationship has trouble, then everybody else, all of you here, get ready for more. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And we will remain in this part of the world, and I'll give the floor to Leslie, who will focus on Latin America, I guess.
Yes. Well, thank you. I don't know what else much more I can say about, the global part of, the foreign policy of the U.S., right? Either under Kamala Harris or, Donald Trump. What I would ask and pose as a question regarding the overall approach of, in terms of foreign policy is what has changed? What has changed with Biden administration vis-a-vis Donald Trump's foreign policy? Of course, you have Donald Trump, this very incendiary rhetoric, right? Blaming and shaming, right, in foreign policy. However, if we go to the substance of the foreign policy of Donald Trump vis-a-vis Biden, I don't think there is much change. There is a lot of continuity, right? There is a lot of continuity when it comes to China. Right? There is actually the NATO stuff. We can trace it back to the, when, the post-war Europe, where, presidents once, the welfare state started to, proliferate, and then, they still to make money. Then, you see the U.S. presidents recurrently asking for more contributions to the, the security architecture. So I don't know. I think possibly we are emphasizing too much change there in every single aspect, right? So there is change, perhaps, is that, with Trump we see, some kind of dismissal of, of the multilateral, right? The idea or the notion of, sitting people together and talking and trying to, reach certain type of agreement. So Donald Trump approach was basically more bilateral, and I think that's something that Anna mentioned. So in that regard, I think, there is a lot of changing continuity, right, when it comes to Joe Biden's administration. Of course, Biden had to react to certain events like the Russia full-scale invasion, all right, in Ukraine and Israel, Gaza. But that is something that, even in terms of gender, right, and Biden, perhaps we need to be a bit fair to Joe Biden in terms that because of these events, big events, right, Russia and Israel, hasn't had the time to adjust back to whatever, Obama's foreign policy or previous foreign policy were or looked like, right? So I think there is something that, we need to be a bit careful with how much we attribute to these kind of notions of change in foreign policy, and between different presidents with different partisan support. I'm saying this because we need to think about Kamala Harris, what she will bring, what is new there, and I think that's something that rather than having an answer to that, I pose it more like questions, and I suspect that to a certain extent she will follow up on Biden's notions, and therefore we can also link it to some of the foreign policy some kind of the foreign policies of Trump as well. So there is a lot there of continuity. Now, when it comes to why I'm focusing on the global, because I don't have much to say about Latin America, and the reason is that for the U.S. foreign policy, from the U.S. foreign policy perspective, Latin America is irrelevant. It has been a traditional history of neglect in the last 20 years. And now you ask the Latin Americans, we are happy with that. It's like, yeah, with kind of, the foreign policy elites, actually, they just enjoy this kind of, more room to maneuver there. They have more agency. They can, Latin America has experienced a lot of fragmentation because of populist forces, right? We have this, for good or for bad, in Latin America, we have a rich history of populist leadership, right? We have been a fourth wave of populism, in which we have right-wing populism and also left-wing populism, right? And I think those experiences, AMLO in Mexico, Bolsonaro in the past in Brazil, we have Milei in Argentina. So I think that's something that actually the lack of presence of the US in Latin American affairs is actually something that, that allows this kind of, type of, divergence and fragmentations within the region. Now, where the US really, really cares is about the topic of migration and drug trafficking. those two things are, but then we need to differentiate what Latin America is, because it's quite big, right? So we have, of course, we have Central America, plus North America, which is Mexico, right? Where the topic of migration and drug trafficking is the two, hot topics. Then we have South America, where the only case where, there is certain kind of target is Venezuela, because of, Maduro, right? But I'm not so sure whether with Kamala Harris things are going to be that different, right? Those things are there, those topics are there, and I would say that actually democracy, I would say that perhaps Maduro will even feel much at ease with Donald Trump than with Kamala Harris, right? Even though Maduro is like very left-wing, but it's an authoritarian left-wing, right? So, because the expectation is that Harris will push more the Venezuelan regime to, to hold elections again, and democratic ones, and accountable ones. But more than that, I don't know. I don't think there is much to say about Latin America, unfortunately, I mean, trade, yes, there is trade cooperation and those things, and then, the big, Latin America perhaps as a space of big power competition is not. I mean, this tacit agreement between, the US and China, that China can be in Latin America, but only in economic terms, then that is fully respected by China, because China recognized Latin America as the natural sphere of influence of the US. But thank you.
Great, thank you. We are on time. I was not supposed to speak, but I will exploit the privilege of the chair, and I will add a few words about Greece, Cyprus, Eastern Mediterranean, and the US elections. So both Greece and Cyprus have the best relations ever status with the US for some years now. And this is valid for both administrations, the Trump administration and the Biden administration. There was a continuity. And on this, I agree with Leslie that I'm not sure how much change we will see. Especially for some small states. I also agree with Anders that there will be a change for Scandinavian states who are more of like activist states or are interested in multilateralism and norm entrepreneurship, etc., etc. But I think that it's safe to say that in US relations with smaller states, we have America first in different tones, what the difference is in the tone. But there are major issues that will affect the region and Greece and Cyprus. Of course, the Gaza war, and as Kostas said, there will be a continuity, most probably. But Ukraine, I think, is the hot topic in the discussion. How will Trump or Harris handle Ukraine will impact not only Greece or Cyprus, but will impact the whole of Europe and the European Union. And I'm wondering how much prepared we are for an abrupt change in US foreign policy if, for example, Trump is elected and Ukraine is abandoned and all the rest are entrapped, actually. For example, Greece and Cyprus were proponents of the dual-track approach with Russia, and of course followed the West being members of the EU, and for Greece being also member of NATO. So if we have an abrupt change in US foreign policy, are we prepared for this? Is there a scenario for this? Also, as small states care about their immediate interests, another point of focus for Greece and Cyprus is the U.S. relations with Turkey. The U.S.-Turkey relations deteriorated due to Turkey's strategic autonomy course, relations with Russia, the S-400, the differentiation within NATO. So how will the relations evolve under a new administration will be critical for the Eastern Mediterranean. Of course, this also depends on Turkey and on Erdogan, but I think it's safe to say that the only evidence we have is Trump's favoritism for strongmen and for his relaxed position with authoritarian regimes. At the same time, the Democratic Party wants an improvement of relations with Turkey. So it depends also on what Turkey wants and how Erdogan will play his cards. Also, as we speak for small states and the US, we need to keep in mind other factors that shape the relationship between small states and the US. And polarity is one of them, and the strategic environment. The level of competition between US and China is critical, and we don't expect this to change under Harris administration or under a Trump administration. Also, the level of unity within the US and how much small states are able to lobby and to influence US politics or different sectors within the US administration is critical. Diaspora lobbying is also critical. For example, for the Eastern Mediterranean, the EastMed Act was a bipartisan bill supported both by Democrats and Republicans. And for this reason, sometimes doesn't matter who the president is, but who the members of the Congress are and how close are to specific small states or to the diasporas. So for small states, diasporas in the states is critical who will they elect in the Congress, because it's not all on the president's hands. Checks and balances work and count. So this is it. Let's wait for a few weeks to see who is elected. And I'll open the floor for questions for the Q&A part. My suggestion is to take a first round of questions, 3-4 questions. Please keep your questions brief and clarify to whom you address your question, and try to use the microphones. Are there any questions? Okay, we have Sci students today. I don't believe it. Yeah, please.
Miss Anna.
Yes?
You're Miss Anna. I would like to ask you, you said before that Harris seems to be more keen on keeping the status quo in the Western Balkans. But undeniably there are issues with that, such as the violence that has occurred in North Mitrovica over the last years. Do you think she could be stubborn on said issue and stall progress in changing the status quo and solving said problems? Thank you very much.
each candidate will, what kind of policy each candidate will pursue regarding the issue?
Thank you for the question. With status quo, I didn't. Thank you. With status quo, I didn't mean support the current non-resolution of the issue, but leave the leadership of resolving the issue to the EU and not meddle in the region via either personal business or unpredictable ethno-nationalist views that we've seen in Trump first administration. That's what I thought when I said that Harris would keep the status quo, not support it in terms of, you know, stabilitocracy is better than democracy, but that her administration would support European leadership, EU's leadership in solving the issues in Europe's neighborhood. That was my.
Okay, I will not risk to make more predictions about what will happen in the Middle East, but we don't know. We have seen Biden trying to put some pressure on Netanyahu, but the Netanyahu administration defied Washington in many occasions. When it attempted to withhold some weapons, there was a huge backlash, not only from the Republican, the Trump camp, but also from a great part of the Democratic Party. So actually I cannot answer this question, you know, because maybe it's in the hands of local actors to get out of this impasse rather than external powers. Okay, we will see.
Any other thoughts on this from?
I mean, I agree. You don't know. I'll say 2 points, though. I know for a fact that the State Department is completely now excluded from any policy making on Gaza. It's all happening in the White House. So if Trump comes back in, you can expect the same, and I assume that the same will happen with Kamala Harris. So it's not going to be the institutions of government, it's the White House totally. The other point I would make is, you know, even if there is a ceasefire, the damage is done. I mean, I'm not talking about the humanitarian damage in Gaza. I'm talking about the political damage in the Middle East. This is an all-time low for attitudes, both elite and popular attitudes for US foreign policy in the region. And it's going to take a generation to get back to where it was, even during the Trump era. So a ceasefire would be good for the people on the ground. I'm not sure it's going to have a huge impact necessarily on US relations with the region.
Yes, thank you for the question. Actually, I was thinking what kind of answer I can give to that. But I think there are certain things that both will do similar and others will be quite different. And the similarity is that it is about Mexico. And Trump, when he was president, he exerted excessive pressure on Mexico to move basically the border to the south of Mexico. What do I mean by this? It's like more control and more resources allocated to the south border of Mexico with Central America to prevent and to filter and to control more the waves of migration. And I think that's something that Joe Biden has allocated even more resources than Trump to do that, to support Mexico in controlling the flow of migration. So I suspect that Harris will basically stay the same on that, and Trump will do actually, yeah, it was his policy. It was like pressure on Mexico to do that. But at the same time, I think, you know, there is something about the narrative, something about the rhetoric here that is actually, you know, Trump will criminalize more migration and associated with gangs, with violence and criminality and drug trafficking, while Kamala Harris will be more kind of, you know, will try to have a more humanitarian approach to migration. And I think in those regards, and those rhetorics are not empty words. I mean, they translate some sort of, you know, policy in the border. Now, in terms of, you know, perhaps Trump is going to try to build even a higher wall but it's still, still migration still happens. I mean, with all these policies there, you cannot control it. You cannot eradicate it 100%. So it is what both will do is try to manage the migratory flow. So that.
Are there any other questions? Dimitri? Not really.
From this microphone?
Yes.
So I've heard you all talk about how different regions perceive the US election, but I think that that doesn't really matter. Yes, because you don't vote for the US election. So maybe the question is how the US perceives the US election, and not the average US voter, but the political system itself of the United States. And so to me, maybe the question for the US is about if the United States can have an administrative position on the world and have impact on different security matters or not on the foreign policy. And this is maybe the question about the US election of Trump or Kamala. And I don't know who wants to respond to me, whoever wants to take the floor.
Okay. Are there any other...
Excuse me, can you come again with the latest sentence? What is your concern about the two candidates?
My concern...
I couldn't hear you very well.
Okay, my concern is whether the United States political system perceives the election as a choice of being able to manage security matters around the world, or it needs to have a setback in order to reorganize itself. I don't know.
So interventionism versus isolationism, I guess, maybe. Iona, try to approach a microphone, please.
I'd like to ask the question for Africa as a whole. I will address specifically Mr. Zarzo, anyone, any other member of the panel can answer me. Are there probably going to be any change in the USA's goals, strategic and financial goals in Africa?
Στο μικρόφωνο, παρακαλώ.
I'll address firstly Mr. Zarasur, any other member of the panel who can answer to me. I'm asking about Africa as a whole, not only the northern region. Is there any probability that the strategic goals and aims of the United States may change to any direction, whether Kamala Harris is elected or Donald Trump? Bearing in mind, for instance, that the Lobito corridor is planned to be revitalized in Southern Africa. Are we going to see any difference in initiatives? Thank you.
Okay. Yes?
Many of you spoke about voting blocks inside the US, and there are many swing states, right? Many of those swing states have specific voting blocks. For example, Pennsylvania has many Polish Americans, and they care about Ukraine. There are also Ukrainian communities, there are also the Jews, there are also the Arab Americans. Regarding Congress and also the electoral vote, how could these voting blocks effectively elect the next president of the US?
Thank you. So let's start with... We will have another round, okay? Let's start with Dimitri's question on isolationism versus interventionism. Anders, you want to take the floor?
Yeah, please. I think that that for any U.S. president, it's not an either or with the interventionism versus the isolationism. I think that when we look at the debate and discussions over Trump, I think his alleged isolationism, I think people exaggerate that. I think if we look at the Trump presidency in the first Trump presidency in Europe and what happened, I don't see an isolationist president. in some instances, he strengthened the U.S. commitment to Europe. As I said before, I think when we look at the Nordic countries, they were in some sense moving closer to the U.S. And that's not just the Nordic countries moving closer to the U.S. It's also the U.S. having an engagement in that region, right? So I think this is something that is both and. But at the same time, I will say that I think we see two trends in the U.S. policy in regard to this. And I think one is a long-term retrenchment away from being the liberal hegemon that we saw first in the Western part of the international system during the Cold War, and then expanding after the Cold War. So we see since Obama, he had the leading from behind, and we see that's kind of the beginning of a gradual retrenchment, which was emphasized during Trump and continued also with Biden. And then we see that the U.S. foreign policy is also changing its direction. So we see that there's a change away from Europe and towards China, because China is seen as the main rival of the United States, and I think also because of demographic and generational changes in the U.S. I think in Europe we've gotten a little used to being overprivileged with the support and the attention from the United States. And that is probably changing because the U.S. electorate is changing, and because you might say the older generations, which had a certain kind of affiliation with Europe and perhaps a nostalgia for Europe, are not so much longer there. So in that sense, I think Biden was in that sense perhaps a voice from the past, and that was good for Europe for a time. But I think no matter who is elected president, we'll see the retrenchment continue, and we'll see this direction away from Europe and towards what the U.S. calls the Indo-Pacific.
Just to adapt to what Anders said about, specifically more about Trump. I mean, we don't have to forget that in his narrative as a populist leader, he has a very nativist discourse. But I mean, actually, that's kind of the tension there in those kind of rhetorics when you are for in order to sell that kind of nativism, he had to engage with the international all the time, to deliver on those, and that actually, the international arena became some sort of another level in which he can convince his domestic audience. So, but it was always that kind of always engaging with the international. And I don't know whether I can address as well what he said about at least with the the case of Florida, I would say, or the Latin American community. Everyone assumes that Latin American communities in the U.S. are, they will go Democrats. So if you see specifically in Florida, they are highly conservative. Their approach in terms of, family values, in terms of religion, in terms of, and I think there is of course, younger generations, they are a bit more liberal, but not, that doesn't make them liberal per se. They still have these kind of, core values behind that. They bring them more to the Republican, candidates. But that.
The political system and the locals. This is another story. I do not have the experience of Leslie, so he knows that the Spanish speakers and the Latin Americans living in the U.S. are democratic. However, I would agree with Andrew when he said that there are strong continuities, and although I use the word isolationist for candidate Trump, this applied to certain issues and institutional issues as regards organizations, as regards global issues like the environment, about which we didn't say much. However, what we do know is that we have an American public opinion that is very skeptical about foreign entanglements after Iraq and Afghanistan, this is for sure, and everybody else. That's why we have a small number of UN operations abroad as we speak. I don't know whether this will change. However, this is something that we didn't touch upon, is the advisors and the close circle around both new presidents. Now we have Phil Gordon, who is very well known, who is the advisor of Kamala Harris. We all know him, those who are looking at, all of us that we're looking at the evolution of European security and transatlantic relations. And he's pro-multilateral, and we do know that the style will be different. The style will be more diplomatic on the part of Kamala Harris. She's going to be strong on issues. She's going to be strong on China, as Trump is going to be strong. These days, Kamala Harris, it seems to me, does not have the luxury not to project a hard American strong profile, hard power profile, about which Trump advertises very much. And this is something that touches upon the American public opinion. She's not going to escape from that. This is something that I said already about the trade issues and economic issues, about which she's going to be, I mean, in that area, I think it's going to be a strong continuity, because the economic situation has to be empowered, and it has been demonstrated as such. Therefore, it is very important to see the circle around all candidates, both candidates, when they become presidents. And it seems to me that although Kamala Harris is more institutional, even if we do know that, we do see that president, if, I'm not wishing that, but you never know, if we have Trump as a president, even if he has the best possible advisors, experience has shown that it doesn't matter. He's going to do, and he's more likely to project a wrong policy despite different advice. Therefore, unpredictability is something that we are really, really interested to avoid.
Just to add something very quickly on Dimitri's question, he didn't want America to go alone. He wanted America to make America great again. And in order to be great, you need followers. He just wanted everyone else to adapt to his vision of the world, of a global tariffs world, let's say, or everyone else to follow on bringing the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, for example. He wanted to change the order, in my view. So I'll give the floor to Kostas for the Africa question.
Can I
and
just
then
add something, Rebecca?
Also,
One sentence. I don't think I understood Dimitri's question the same way in terms of whether this or other type of foreign policy, but what is the role of election in foreign policy making at all? Not in terms of content, but for foreign policy. And as foreign policy analysts, we can offer some view on that. We have to know something. So I would just say this is an intermediate variable, right? It really helps on legitimacy. If you want to be a global leader, it helps that you are a legitimate leader at home. Whether you achieve that in the election with a majority, win, or you have to persuade your electorate all the time that something is really important for the world and you have to sustain it, that's then a different, each issue might be differently demanding, but domestic election definitely is an important view of legitimacy of the government, and then as a intermediate variable of its foreign policy in the world. That's why you have so-called government recognitions when there are elections around the world, you know, whether a government is recognized by other, it's mostly done for democratic states, yeah, governments or not. It has nothing to do with state recognition, obviously that is done, but it has to do with whether, you know, election was legitimate, transparent, according to democratic standards. I would say legitimacy is the answer of domestic election function.
Thank you, and I'll give the floor to Kostas for the Africa question.
Okay. A very brief response. I don't have a clear picture about the two candidates' view of African policy. And of course, we should talk about African policies, depending on the specific region of Africa, the specific context. It's clearly not a priority for the US foreign policy. We have seen the withdrawal of US troops from Niger during this crisis in the Sahel during the last years. What I assume is that the next US president will view African issues through the prism of the great power competition with China. And maybe China will drag the US deeper into African politics in certain fields. We have seen there also, my point for the Middle East is the same here, that we can see Russia and even Turkey, the Emirates playing a very significant role, especially in the Sahel, the Horn of Africa, North Africa region, and so on. So this is my brief answer. Thank you.
Okay, I spent a bit of time in the summer in East Africa and engaged with security, energy people a lot. And the first point I'd make is there's a lot of disillusionment in Africa over the absence of American leadership. Not just the absence, but the disinterest of the US in the region. And so that's something that Kostas was saying, and that's something very clear. The second point is it's very transactional, their relationship with these countries in Africa, on a particular issue at a particular time, and then they disengage. But there are going to be three things in the next administration that will determine engagement in Africa. And the first is terrorism. The head of African Command, the senior military official and US official in Africa, said the other day that ISIS has doubled in its numbers in East Africa over the last 8 months. And so given the obsession of the US with Islamist terrorism, if this becomes a talking point, you're going to see a lot more American engagement. And the second point is energy. US energy firms are engaging in parts of Africa, Angola, off the coast of West Africa, very actively, because there seems to be a lot of opportunities, particularly in LNG. And so that's another area. And the third is China, but I would have a different take than Kostas. Even though there's great dissatisfaction with America's role in Africa right now, there's increasing dissatisfaction with China's role in Africa right now. And I think the American policy, if they have one, will be let the Chinese make as many mistakes as possible. And let's see where we are in a few years.
I have a complementary note because the colleague questioned about the Maputo development corridor, right? So I just want to say that US is not strong on development policy except for big infrastructure energy products. It leaves the EU to deal with Africa and, you know, empowerment of civil society and all these kinds of soft issues. That's okay. But if security will become a more important issue, like terrorist or any other kind of security issues, then this will prevail over development agenda in the US. So it depends on the terrain, but I am no expert to evaluate what happens in Mozambique, South Africa, or Swaziland. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna. And when it comes to the Global South, I think we need also to consider the soft power competition and the influence of Russia also, and this multipolar vision with different cultural poles, etc., but also China's influence in Africa. And we have also the question about the voting blocks. I don't know if anyone, Leslie answered about the Latin Americans, and I'm sure that they will have an influence, but this will be critical only on critical states, like Michigan, for example, and the Arab voters in Michigan. So we'll see. There is one question, and then.
It is very much obvious that the outcome of the American elections affects everything both inside and outside of the United States. And this gives motivation for everyone to try to intervene in the elections. So my question is the following. At what level do foreign actors like China or Russia, companies like banks, or even single persons like Elon Musk try to affect the outcome of the elections through both the information sphere or even monetary money like bribes or money laundering, etc.? At what level do they indeed affect the elections?
Thank you. And Iasonas, you have a question? You need the mic. Ask for a mic from. Okay.
I want to return to the Israel-Palestine crisis and ask if there is any specific and clear political agenda or foreign policies that either of the candidates, Trump or Harris, wants to implement and follow regarding the Gaza and Lebanon situation after they get elected. Because even in the debate, nothing really was mentioned, and Harris was still talking about Israel's right to self-defense even after a year of Israel brutally attacking the Palestinians, and recently with a ground invasion in Beirut. So my question is there any other vision showcased by the candidates rather than them maintaining U.S. support to Israel? Yeah.
Thank you, Tassos. And
Thank you.
One more question.
On the topic of climate policies, how will the Paris Agreement be dealt with from either the Harris or Trump administration? Will we see another recognition? Will it be undermined, or will it stay as it is?
Thank you. And the last one over there, yes?
I would like to ask the Latin American speaker, you said earlier that Maduro and Trump, since they are both more authoritarian leaning, might develop decent relations. I would like to ask whether, due to Venezuela's more closed economy, and even though they are very rich in minerals, whether the United States would adopt a more confrontational approach so that perhaps big U.S. companies would enter that market. And lastly, I would like to ask, since we have seen the election in Argentina of right-wing populist, Mr. Milei, and whether an election of Trump could, boost the relationships both financially and therefore divert the U.S.'s attention in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have disinformation and other ways to influence elections. We have the Arab-Israeli conflict, environment and Paris Agreement, and also Latin America. Shall we start with Latin America?
Yeah, no, thank you for the questions. Yes, I mean, Venezuela, there is certain things that happen at the leader level, right? Individuals, like representatives of the states, right? And I think here, Trump, I'm not saying that that Maduro will be more at ease. It will be certainly compared to Harris, it will be, Trump will bother less, Maduro. right? But at the same time, there is always kind of, asking about, this kind of, condemning the regime of Venezuela for being an authoritarian system. And now the other level is like the level of trade and the interdependence. And I think here we need to remember that Biden actually kind of relaxed the economic policy of, regarding oil, right? And it has to do with, Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine, and in that regard, Biden reopened, the import of oil resources from Venezuela, which actually has helped Maduro to in the provision of different domestic policies, right? Especially targeted to his followers and his groups, in the different, especially in the poorest areas. And I think that actually has helped, and that's one of the reasons why Maduro called for elections, because he thought that, with all resources and the new, money that was coming in through the exports to the U.S., he and that reinvestment at the domestic level, that gave him enough room to, to be supported again. It's an oil-rich country. And when it comes to the case of Milei, I'm not so sure whether I got that question at all. But I don't know whether you can repeat if because I didn't get it right, I think.
Yeah. Whether, since they are both ideologically aligned, financially and politically, I asked whether we would see much more cooperation towards or trade, for example, or for example, the dollarization of Argentina, etc.
Yeah. No. Well, yes. Argentina is a fascinating case. They always have an economic crisis every 10 years, and a massive one, and they go into big problems. But I mean, Milei has actually has called Trump my friend, as being like the kind of the role model to follow. Right, and I think that's something that it has to do with the type of kind of the populist narrative, right? There is like an admiration of Donald Trump for what he did, right? Whatever he did, I'm not so sure. So in terms of ideological alignment, I think there is a difference, and it has to do with the trade policy. Trump is more like an economic nationalist that targets on certain key sectors to protect them, while Milei actually implements type of policies that are highly neoliberal. And I think there is a big difference. He's not protecting key strategic sectors of the Argentinian economy. And I think there is a big difference there. So there is, of course, political alignment, at least more from the Milei perspective, right? I don't think Trump cares much, actually, about Argentina or Milei, right? But I think, in terms of economic policies, they pursue different type of, of trade policies, actually. And I think that actually, yes, they're not complementary. Thank you.
On the Arab-Israeli conflict, any views?
No, please.
Very quickly, historically there's been no upside in elections in the US for being tough on Israel. Maybe the Carter administration had the beginnings of this, but they let it go when the Camp David process began. But I think there's only one way that you might see a much more staunch stance on Israel's policies, and that is if those parts of the electorate that are seen to be crucial, like in Michigan, if they are key in the final outcome of the election. So if Trump loses because these groups stick with the Democrats, then they may have a certain amount of leverage in the short term, or maybe a bit longer. If Trump wins because these constituencies abandoned the Democrats over their policy in Gaza, then again, for Democrats, they may have more influence going forward, but it ain't going to impact at all Trump's policies on Gaza, which would be business as usual.
Thank you. Any thoughts on environment or the disinformation? Anders and Anna.
Well, I have on the climate issue. I think you will see a real difference between the candidates on climate, and I think actually on climate is an issue area where you also saw a particular Trump policy during the first presidency. I think he is not too worried about the climate, and his disregard for the long term also means that, and for international institutions and multilateral treaties, also means that we're likely to see any progress on that. Quite the opposite, probably, if Trump is elected. When that is said, I think one of the lessons also of the first Trump presidency was how much of the actual climate policy that takes place not on the federal level in the United States, but on the level of the states and the cities. So at least the experience from Scandinavian actors, and this is a big thing in the Nordic countries, that was that a lot of work could be done with the U.S. cities and with U.S. states, and in that sense, the U.S. You might say the U.S. at the federal level was not so much a partner. But a lot of America was actually partners on combating climate change. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna.
I want to complement this just with one thought, and that is climate agreement effects are very much conditioned by trade, because they affect prices of products, services, and I think Paris Agreement effects are very much linked to whether the US returns to the World Trade Organization dispute settlement, which has long been put aside, and this is just a wild, thing and not regulated liberal idea of trade anymore. So that's why I think many of the effects of the climate agreements that could be provisioned in advance, because there is a dispute settlement mechanisms, are have negative prejudice by states, because there is no backup if something is not done according to expectations. So I think that is relevant, but I can't predict. I don't have enough insight to say whether, well, Trump, absolutely not, but whether Harris has any inclinations to return to the dispute settlement mechanism in WTO. As for the disinformation campaigns or intrusion in domestic affairs, I don't have any inside espionage intel, but I want to mention something connected to this, and it's classical diplomacy. I think that. And on the side of the EU as an actor, I think that EU countries and EU itself as an actor made a big mistake. I mean, it's not my thought, but they realized it themselves, that at the first time of Trump candidacy, they didn't get prepared. They didn't get involved, they didn't get data, they didn't have any prior diplomatic engagement on the ground. This is not, intrusion, but it's getting ready your diplomatic agents to work with anyone who is elected. And they were very, very surprised, and so that this hit the EU very much. We could see this year a lot, basically all diplomatic corps of EU member countries and EU's representatives themselves being present, obviously at the Democratic, but mostly at the Republican convention, working really hard with anyone on content issues, right? So not on, we don't dislike you, but still we have to work. No. What would be the content issues that the EU and the transatlantic, dialogue should keep up, whichever candidate wins? So I think this is quite important.
Thank you, Anna. Just briefly.
Just a note to continue from what Anna has said. There is much knowledge nowadays that there is going to be, in the first place, there is a preference from President Putin on having Trump as a president of the US. Therefore, they have been prepared precisely for this projected message and disinformation campaign that is going to take place. This is something that it seems that something has progressed in terms of countering this disinformation campaign about which we all know. It's only.
Thank you so much, Fotini. But when it comes to disinformation, I think we need to think not only for disinformation from outside, but also for disinformation from inside, and even coming from the candidates. For example, about immigrants who eat the Americans' pets. So I have a last question from someone who watches through YouTube, and I think we need to take it. And I'm hoping that I'm not opening the Pandora's box here. So, your views on how Trump or Harris' presidency will affect Chinese calculations of war against Taiwan, and what does that mean for European states? Start preparing now or wait until then, like we did with Russia? Any thoughts?
I'll just say that could probably be the National Security Council asking, because this is what they're doing every day, right? They are.
Actually, someone from Washington, you are right.
There you go. Every day, this is what they're thinking about. And partly it's because of the practicalities of their relationship with Japan and South Korea, and partly it's because of energy issues, and partly it's because of legitimacy and credibility and being there for their allies. But I mean, then the issue is, what can they also do? So I would say, and just a guess, and I have no particular expertise, I'd say China is probably less inclined to push further on Taiwan in a Trump presidency than in a Democratic presidency. But that's just my view.
But at the same time, I would like to add that there is an effort from both candidates to play hard ball as regards China. Because as we have already discussed, for both candidates, China is the primary challenger. And then goes other issues. Therefore, it might be a difference of style, or for different reasons, because Harris is more institutional, Trump is more populist, never said that he doesn't want a great America, for inside as well as for outside. Therefore, and his previous policy on China was not very different, they are going to play hardball, both of them. This is what they have demonstrated, either as candidates as well as from previous experience, and I'm referring to Trump.
Does this mean deterrence in terms of the question? Because what failed in Russia and Ukraine was deterrence.
I think that they will play better deterrence in that area. And this, you gave me a very strong kind of...
One sentence.
1 second. This is why Trump, in contrast to Harris, I think he's going to negotiate better NATO's role in the area.
Trump will negotiate better than Harris?
Not negotiate, but in the terms we mean, but in the terms of quid pro quo, as regards a more dynamic role of NATO in the Asia terrain. And then this is something that we will see, I guess.
Let's hope that we'll not see it. Okay. Yes. Okay, we can conclude this roundtable, successful roundtable. I think it's a fascinating way to start the academic year, and I'm grateful to all my esteemed colleagues, the speakers. I'm grateful to you all for spending your evening with us. I'm grateful to Staphis and Lazaros, our technicians who supported the event, and have a nice night.